Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare. Krishna, Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Ram Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Jaya Radha Madan Mohan Radha Madan Mohan Radhe, Jaya Radha Madan Mohan Radha Madan Mohan Radhe, Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada, Nittai Gora Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nittai Gora Hari Bol, Nittai Gora Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nittai Gora Hari Bol. Should we do Narsimharti also? Yeah.
But it's 6:30.
Yeah, we can just do till Prabhu comes.
Okay.
Yeah. Rama, anything you want to sing? Arti? You sing and he can play the harmony. You'll sing it? You sing it. You sing. Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Namaste Narasimhaya.
Pralada Lada Daine.
Pralada Lada Daine.
Pralada Lada Daine.
Pralada Lada Daine.
Hiranyakashi Purvakshaha.
Hiranyakashi Purvakshaha.
Hiranyakashi Purvakshaha.
Hiranyakashi Purvakshaha.
Shilatankanakalae.
Anakhalae.
Shilatankanakalae.
Shilatankhalae.
Ito Narsimo Parato Narsimo.
Ito Narsimo Parato Narsimo.
Ito Narsimo Parato Narsimo.
Ito Narsimo Parato Narsimo.
Yato Yato Yami Tato 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 Narsimo.
Bahir Narsimo Hridaye Narsimo.
Bahir Narsimo Hridaye Narsimo.
Bahir Narsimo Hridaye Narsimo.
Bahir Narsimo Hridaye Narsimo.
Narsimha Madim Sharanam Prapadye.
Narasimha Madim.
Madim Sharanam Prapadye.
Madim Pade.
Karakamalavare Nakam Adbhuta Shringam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanubringam Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadish
Tava Kara Kamalavare Nakham Adbhuta Shringam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanubringam Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare
Tava Karakamalavare Nakham Adbhuta Shringam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Drita Hari Rupa Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare Jai Jagadish Hare
Tavakara Kamalavare Nakham Adbhuta Shringam Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanubringam जगदीश
Jaya Namadev Jaya Narsimhadev Jaya Narsimhadev Jaya Narsimhadev
जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव जय नरसिंहदेव
Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj
जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज जय प्रहलाद महाराज
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada
जय जय प्रभुपाद 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 जय जय प्रभुपाद
Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Jaya Dev
जय जय गुरुदेव 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 जय जय गुरुदेव
Nitai Gora Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Nitai Gora Hari Bol
ताई गौरा हरि बोल हरि बोल हरि बोल निताई गौरा हरि बोल। नरसिंह भगवान की जय, प्रहलाद महाराज की जय। In 2 minutes, can you just continue for 5 minutes? They're just waiting.
That's what I'm gonna do.
Okay.
Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shri Bhakti
पदा भूतले भक्ति वेदांता सिनामि
Namaste Saraswati Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Dishatarine
नमस्ते सरस्वती देवी रवाणी प्रचारि शेषाशून्यवादी पाश्चात्य दिशतारिणे
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shiva Sadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare Rama Hare
Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Rama Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Rama Rama Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram Hare Hare.
Krishna Krishna Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare.
Jaya Radha Madan Mohan, Radhe.
Jaya Radha Madan Mohan Radhe.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Nittai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nittai Gaura Hari Bol, Gaur Premanande Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna. It's audible. So we'll just quickly introduce Chaitanya Prabhu. Chaitanya Prabhu is a monk, mentor and spiritual author. He travels all over the world from Australia to America giving talks on spiritual subjects in universities such as Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, Cambridge and companies such as Intel, Google, Amazon. And his articles has been published in many national newspapers including Indian Express, Economic Times and Times of India in the Speaking Tree column. His writings in English have been translated into several foreign languages, including German, Chinese, Romanian. He is a member of ISKCON's leading intellectual body, the Shastrik Advisory Council, and is the associate editor of ISKCON's global magazine, Back to Godhead. He is the author of 25 books. Yeah, there are, you will see one after the class. Okay, so we'll loudly welcome Chaitanya Prabhu by loudly chanting 3 times Haribol. Haribol, Haribol, Haribol.
Hare Krishna. Just for some logistics, all of you can come little front so that people can in the back. Thank you so much for everyone for coming. So happy to have you all. And if you need any restroom and anything, it's a room. It's inside the home. You can go from here and inside the home, the restrooms and all. And the water should be there somewhere. Yeah, here in the front. If you need some water, is here. Thank you.
Am I audible? Okay. Am I audible behind? Can you come? So, thank you.
Prabhuji, sorry, 1 minute. So, if I can request all the male Prabhus this side and then Mataji's can be that side, so they can also come in the front if they want to. This side, all the males can be. Thank you.
Let's begin with some prayers. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanishkalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Is it done? Right. Okay. Om Jnanatim. Not on now. First settle it, then we'll start. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Okay. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjanishkalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine Vancha Kalpatarubhascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Kindly repeat after me. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So thank all of you for coming today evening for this discussion on self-understanding and self-transformation through Bhagavad-gita, the Gita's wisdom. There are many subjects that we study in life. We study professionally for our careers. We may study out of interest for our hobbies. Among all the subjects that we may study in life, probably the most important subject, a subject to which sometimes we do not give sufficient importance, is we ourselves. What do I mean by we ourselves? I'm not here talking about being self-centered or narcissistic, where a person is constantly obsessed with themselves. But here we're talking about we gaining a better working understanding of ourselves. The Bhagavad-gita will come to a verse which we'll recite when we discuss about the Gita. But the Bhagavad-gita begins about to fight. That time, just before he is about to begin that war, something comes up within him and stops him. His own thoughts, especially his emotions, his conceptions, all of them, they suddenly block him from doing anything at all. And he becomes paralyzed. Visrujya sasharam chapam shoka samvina manasaha. And he puts aside his bow, unable to fight. He's filled with tears. Sasharam tam tam tatha krupaya vishtam ashru purna kulekshanam. His eyes are filled with tears. Due to which Arjuna is over into the specific circumstantial or historical causes. Because its focus is not historical or circumstantial. Its focus is universal. So it analyzes what was it from inside us, inside Arjuna, and in general from inside us human beings that sometimes works against us. We can say that if we look at our own behavior, we are sometimes wise and we are sometimes otherwise. When we are especially giving advice to others, we surprise ourselves. Oh, points I spoke. So we tend to be wise at that time. But then sometimes we look back at ourselves and what did I do? Why did I speak like that? Why did I do like that? So we can't even recognize who is this person who spoke like this or who did like this. So that's the time when we sometimes tend to be, we could say, otherwise. So this is our puzzling predicament with respect to ourselves, that we are sometimes wise and we are sometimes otherwise. And then what happens is, during a particular circumstance or a particular high stake situation, we ourselves can't predict which part of us, the wise part or the otherwise part, will pop up. Like some cricket teams are known to be very unpredictable. And sometimes they will play in such a way that even the best team gets crushed. But the other times they play in such a way as if, oh, this should not be even a team, should not even play street cricket, or to speak of international cricket. So like that, there seems to be almost different selves inside us which pop up at different times. And this is not just an insight that the Bhagavad-gita is demonstrating by Arjuna's sudden and utterly uncharacteristic attack of nerves that he's experiencing. This is something which many thinkers across history and geography have pointed out. So, for example, would you even like this quote? Yes, please.
Back to reflect upon. Sorry. Yeah. And creature is constituted to be that properties.
Thank you. So we are just made in such a way that we live with someone, we talk with someone, and one day, how did this person do like this? So it happens with others, but it can happen even with ourselves. So the Bhagavad-gita explains at one level that this happens because there are multiple layers to our existence. So I will self-understanding will center on redefining our relationship with ourselves. This is the verse which I'll base the talk on. I'll come back to this verse. But let me explain what this verse is saying and then we'll recite the verse together. So Krishna is saying, Indriyani paranyahur. This is 342 in the Bhagavad Gita. That Indriyani are our senses. So our senses, ahu refers to the world around us. The senses exist above the world around us. That means, say, if there is a TV in our room or there's a fridge, and we decide, I don't want to waste time watching, or I don't want to. But the TV doesn't walk to us. The fridge doesn't walk to us. Go there, our eyes look at it, and then we consume whatever is there. So the senses is considered about the physical world. Indriyani paranyahur. That above the senses are the mind. Is the mind. So the mind is something which can keep dwelling on things even when something is not physically accessible for us. And that is the nature of craving. So we may fantasize about something, crave about it. Even if it is not there, we're constantly thinking about it. So the senses at least depend on physical accessibility of that object. But the mind doesn't depend on that. The mind can keep craving for it. So in that sense, it's not limited by the normal constraints of space that limit our senses. So that's why the mind is considered above the senses. And it is not just space, we could say even time. When we are when we are sleeping, unless we have the habit of sleepwalking, most of us are in terms of the senses, but our mind is still active, fantasizing. So both in terms of space and time, the mind is superior to the senses. Then Krishna says, Manasastu para buddhe, that above the senses is the intelligence. While our mind can come up with various ideas and suggestions and fantasies, have inside us a faculty. Should I be doing this? Should I fast for health, for fitness, or for religious or spiritual purposes? Say suppose at that time, if some food which came not, will say no to that. But suppose there's on that same day, maybe in our own, there is a cat, and that cat sees a mouse. It can't think, oh, today's Ekadashi, I'm meant to fast. It just can't. The impulse comes and it will consume it. So we have this rational faculty by which we can evaluate the impulses that. So manas, and then it says yo buddhe paratastu saha, that above the intelligence is saha. Saha refers to the actual person over here. That person is a pronoun referring to the actual source of consciousness. That is the Atma. That is the soul. So we'll come back to this verse, but let's try to depict it, see it depicted visually. So here, so this is Krishna is talking about the hierarchy of our inner world. So the physical world with the many objects that often tempt and distract us. That is in this hierarchy the lowest. Because largely that is insentient. Above that are the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. And above that is the soul proper. Now all of these are put in one box. Why? Because this is our inner world. And when we act, which of these elements is acting? Is it our senses acting even without being aware? Is it our mind acting? Is it our intelligence acting? Or is it the soul acting? So that is not always clear for us. And that's why there can be confusion. So today we'll try to get a better understanding of this model of the inner world, and then to see how we can get our inner world to work for us instead of against us. So let's go back and we'll recite the verse. Yeah. So, yeah. Indriyani paranyahur Indriyebhya param manah manasastu para buddhir yo बुद्धे परतस्तु सः इन्द्रियाणि पराण्याहुर् इन्द्रियेभ्यः परं मनः मनसस्तु परा बुद्धिः यो बुद्धे परतस्तु सः इन्द्रियाणि पराण्याहुर् इन्द्रियेभ्यः परं मनः मनसस्तु परा बुद्धिर् यो बुद्धे परतस्तु सः. Would anyone like to recite? Please. Indriyani paranyahur Indriyebhya param manaha
मनसस्तु परा बुद्धिर्
Manasastu para buddhi
यो बुद्धे परतस्तु सः
Buddhe paratastu saha. Thank you. Anyone else? Any other ladies would like to recite?
इन्द्रियाणि
Nyahur
इन्द्रियेभ्यः परं मनः
Indriye
मनसस्तु परा बुद्धिर्
Manasastu para buddhir
यो बुद्धे परतस्तु सः.
Yo buddhe paratastu saha. Thank you. Anyone else?
इन्द्रियाणि परा बुद्धिर् इन्द्रियाभ्यः परं मनः
Indriyebhya param manah
मनसस्तु परा बुद्धिर्
Manasastu para buddhir
यो बुद्धे परस्तु सः
Yo buddhe paratastu saha. Thank you. Yes.
इन्द्रियाणि पराण्याहुर्
Indriyani paranyahu
इन्द्रियेभ्यः परमं मनः
Indriyebhya param manah
मनसस्तु परा बुद्धिर्
Manasastu para buddhir
यो बुद्धे परतस्तु सः.
Yo buddhe paratastu saha. Thank you. So here, see that. Say for example, if we have children, now children often, not that they don't have intelligence, but their intelligence may not be sufficiently developed. So if they don't like some food, even if it is necessary, even if it's healthy, they'll not eat it at all. Because maybe at that point, the mind with its emotions, I don't like this, it overrides the intelligence. So sometimes they have to be persuaded, a little bit compelled to eat. So on the other hand, if they like some food, they may eat far more than what is healthy. And you have to tell them, no, not so much. You can eat this tomorrow now. So what is happening over there? The senses and the mind, they often take control. And when they take control, at that time, they may act in a way that may not be for their best interests. So what we can do is, I discussed about this model of these multiple levels in the inner world. We could conceive, and Krishna also does this later in the Gita, I'll come to that verse. We could split this into two parts. The soul and the intelligence, they are the part of the self that is wise. So when the intelligence is in charge and the soul is guiding the intelligence, two are working together, then that is when we act wisely. And the mind is take charge. The time when we act unwise. Traditions, this idea of these different aspects of the self are talked about in different ways, sometimes called the good dog and the bad dog, or sometimes the godly side, the ungodly side, the divine side, the demoniac side, or for that matter, sometimes this is also referred to the impulsive side, the reflective side. So the senses in the mind, they tend to be which? Impulsive or reflective? Impulsive. Yeah, just some idea comes up, just do it immediately. So we tend to give it to the impulses like that. And then, but there is a part of us which is reflective. So now Krishna talks about how we need to learn to handle ourselves better. Like earlier I said that we want to understand ourselves better from a working perspective. Eh, Everything in the world, if we start studying it, it can be endlessly complex. If we start just studying our phone, there are so many apps and so many features, and if most of us probably don't even, not most of, at least I never read the manual fully. It'll take a lifetime to read the manual. So we just look at what we need to know, and then if something doesn't work, then we try to see, can I figure this out, or do I need to go to a specialist? But it's important, if you are using a device regularly, to at least have a good working understanding of that device. So like that, we need a working understanding of ourselves. So this model itself can be much more, we can go into much more complexity of this model. And there are many different models like that given by various world thinkers to try to gain some understanding of ourselves. So we will focus more on a working understanding. So Krishna in the 6th chapter speaks one of the most enigmatic verses of Bhagavad-gita. Here also is talking about the same theme of redefining our relationship with ourselves. So let's try to recite this verse. Just we'll do it once. Uddhared atmanatmanam natmanam avasadayet atmaiva ya atmano bandhur atmaiva ripuratmanah. So Krishna is telling over here, Uddhared, elevate. Uddhared atmanatmanam. That elevate the self, Atma refers to the self over here. Elevate the self with the self. And then Natmanam avasadayet. Don't degrade the self with the self. And then Atmaivaya Atmano Bandhur. The self can be the friend of the self. And simultaneously, Atmaiva Ripuratmanaha. So Bandhu and Ripu are opposites in Sanskrit. Friend and enemy. Now, of course, there is in social media phenomena called frenemy. You know, the same person who sometimes is a friend for us, and sometimes is the enemy for us. So our mind is like the ultimate inner frenemy for us. So there is something inside us which can be our friend, Ripu, and sometimes can be Bandhu, and sometimes it can be Ripu. Sometimes friend, sometimes enemy. So Atmaiva Ripuratmanaha. Now in terms of this verse, so if I said yeah. So what Krishna is telling over here is the wise self. Elevate yourself with the self. What that means is the wise self needs to take responsibility and elevate the otherwise self. If that is not done, then the otherwise, and then that will degrade the wise self. So we end up becoming worse than our present situation if the otherwise self gets complete control over us. And in that sense, he's saying the wise self, so the self can be the friend of the self. That means inside us, if the wise self is in charge, the way we act will be friendly to ourselves, it will be beneficial for ourselves. But if the otherwise self takes charge, then that will be inhospitable, unfriendly, harmful for ourselves. So this is the broad understanding from a perspective that the Bhagavad-gita gives. When you have suddenly lost your nerves, overwhelmed us. So what has happened is your mind, they have taken charge of your inner world. Now this does not mean that the mind and senses are always wrong. That's not the point. Sometimes they also give valid information. They also have valid concerns. Just like if a child is crying or grumbling, or that doesn't always mean that the child is simply being difficult. Sometimes the child may be in difficulty. Child may be sick, the child may be having some pain. and maybe not able to communicate. So Krishna is not saying here that this lower self is always the enemy. It can be. The self can be a friend of self, and the self can be the enemy of the self. So the key thing is that when we are functioning, we need to become a little more introspective. To which self is acting within us? Is it the higher self, the reflective self, the wise self, or is it the unwise self? This is a rough translation. Krishna is saying the self has to, that we have to learn to, okay, there are forces within me which will not always work with me. They may work against me, but I need to learn to direct them. This is the translation of this verse. So basically what happens is, there is another way to understand this verse is that we exist as the inner self, but then within us there is some conception of the self. Say right now, some of you may be feeling, hey, all this is too complicated. Maybe I can't understand all this. So that is a conception that is there in the mind. Yeah, some of it may be difficult to understand, but some of it, once you exercise yourself a little bit, once you understand it, it can be. So yeah, I can do this, I can't do this. Don't always align in the same way. And that's why sometimes we want to do something, we resolve to do something, but then something stops us from doing it. So another way to look at this is that the Gita says the inner reality is 3 levels. There is physical, mental, and spiritual. But the senses and the physical world, they are the physical reality. Senses and the outer world, that is physical reality. Then the mind and the intelligence, they are a part of or mental reality. I'll explain this a little bit more. And then the soul, the Atma, is the spiritual reality. So another way to understand this is, we could use a software metaphor. When we are using any device, the physical part of the device is the hardware. There is the software inside it. So the hardware is like the body, the physical reality. The software is like the mental, the subtle reality. And beyond that is the person using the device. That is the Atma, that is the consciousness. That is the higher self. So this was 342, which we discussed earlier. 343, Krishna says, align the intelligence with the higher selves. Evam buddhe param buddhva samstabhya atmanam atmana. So situate yourself on the higher self. Let's try to understand what this means. When we look at our, say maybe at the end of a day, something major has happened in our life, and we look back, okay, I spoke like this or I did like this. Maybe I could have done like that. Now that very capacity that we have to look back at ourselves and see, okay, I acted like this, but I could have acted like that. So that in that capacity lies our potential for self-transformation. Because it's sometimes the world sets some standards for us. You should act like this, you should not act like this. And the contemporary ethos is, why should anybody else set a standard for me? I will do what I want to do. It's fair enough as one way of looking at the world. At the same time, it's not just that we sometimes defy the world standards of how we should be. Sometimes we defy our own standards, our own expectations of how we should be. So here, I'm not focusing so much on, from a moral perspective, what is right and what is wrong. I'm discussing primarily from a functional perspective, where we all understand that certain actions, which if we do, they are detrimental for us. And we don't want to do those things. So that is what we will be discussing. So if we go back to the here, we all have our devices, and the devices today play a vital role for our functioning. It's almost become like just as social media is a fad, social media bashing is also a fad. Oh, social media is such a big distraction, and the devices give so much distraction, so much trouble. So we may bash it all that we want, But then at the end of the bashing, we will immediately pick it up and look at it. So we can't live without it. We need it, most of the times we need it for functioning in the world today. At the same time, if we are using our devices, now sometimes the devices give us some notifications which are essential. And sometimes the notification may be distracting. So what happens is that it is for us to be able to evaluate. This is a distracting one, I don't need to pay attention right now. Or I don't need to pay any attention to it at all. Or this is urgent. This is an emergency, I need to pay attention to it right now. So the device in one sense will function mechanically. But we need to function consciously. That the device part will just keep popping up notifications. It is we who will have to decide, okay, when to pay attention, when not to pay attention. So we can say to some extent, our lower self is like that device part. It is going to be mechanical. It is going to pop up. Say we pass by we maybe pass by a movie theater, say, maybe I want to go and watch the movie. Well, we pass by some restaurant, I want to go and eat right now. So what happens is, as soon as we expose ourselves to certain stimuli, certain suggestions will pop up within us. And when those suggestions pop up, we can't avoid them popping up. It's difficult. But what we can do is, we can choose whether to act on them or whether we don't act on them. Now, in this connection, we can say that what appears in our inner world, there are two conceptions of that. Like, consider the word thought. So I'll use two sentences using the word thought, and then you can tell me if I'm using the word thought in the same sense or in a different sense. I just got a thought. I have given this a lot of thought. Are they the same? Okay, can anyone say, I just got a thought? What does thought mean over here? It's an idea, suggestion, pop-up. Yeah, it's like a pop-up that has come up inside us. Just got a thought. I have given this a lot of thought. Deliberation. So we could say that it's like the pop-up came, but then I have analyzed it, I have processed it. So we use the word thought for both these senses. Something coming, so in terms of our model of the wise self and unwise self, or the lower self and the higher self, I just got a thought means something has just come up from the lower self, or from the mind and the senses, just something came up inside me. I have given this a lot of thought means that the higher self has dwelt on it. So we we function in both these senses regularly, but just that we may not be conscious which sense we are functioning according to. That may vary according to time, place, circumstance. So generally speaking, we all have certain parts to play in life. I'm talking about a working understanding of the self. So when we are not able to play, say when the otherwise takes over, it may happen because of three main things. It may be because of lack of clarity itself, which is what we focused on till now, that okay, you don't even know that some other self is some other part of me, or some other me is speaking inside me. And that's why we end up doing certain things which we may regret afterwards. So that's the first part, is clarity. But apart from that, there is purity. By here purity, we're not talking a religious sense of being puritanical or holier than thou. Purity means here just that our inner desires are aligned with our values. So we all have certain values. This is what is important for me. But sometimes our desires are misaligned. So purity means that our desires are aligned with our values. So when that is not there, then we lack the inner strength. I may value XYZ, but when ABC comes up, I just get carried away by that. So it's not that we may not understand, okay, we may not be knowing the terms, say impulsive self and reflective self, but we feel, hey, no, this is not what I want to do. But still, I just can't stop doing it. Just get carried away by it. So we may lack the purity. And then last could be the ability. So ability means that even if we understand that this is a particular aspect, this is what I don't want to do, but how do I go about avoiding it? How do I go about dealing with it? So we look at how the Gita can help us in dealing with these three things. So as far as the lack of clarity is concerned, the Gita can act like an inner flashlight, like an inner illuminator, which enables us, okay, this is this part of the self-acting, this is the other part of the self-acting. Then we don't just need an illuminator, we need also a cleanser. That when certain desires, as I said, the desires become stronger than our values. At that time, what do? We need to sweep out the desires that are not in alignment with our values. That's the cleansing part. And then there is the inner trainer part. The inner trainer is what will help us develop the skills. Okay, if this is what I want to do, how do I go about doing it? So this will be the last part of our talk. And then you can have questions, a few questions. But at this point, are there any questions or reflections which anyone would like to ask or speak about? Yes, please.
So, where does the material intelligence fit in this model? Because, intelligence connected to the soul is the wise. But
Yeah.
generally,
I don't think that differentiation is the most important at this page, material and spiritual intelligence, because ultimately, even material intelligence is intelligence. If we may say that somebody may be brilliant in their professional field, maybe they are very good at engineering or software or particular field, but then maybe in their personal behavior, we may say that they succumb to self-destructive habits and they just don't care for it, or they just can't control it. So you may say they are lacking that intelligence. So basically we could say, even to study and to excel in their field, maybe when the impulses come at that time, they don't succumb to it. If I'm going to go to this project, I'm going to do this project. I'm not going to drink or smoke or do drugs or anything like that. Just going to focus on this. But maybe after that, when they're partying, they may just do it too much and then we get into trouble. So that differentiation can have its own place, but at this stage we don't have to go too much into the technicality. So for a person to succeed in any area of life, to excel in any area of life, they have to have the capacity for being able to restrain their impulses. But what happens is, if a person does not have a higher vision of life, a higher understanding of life's purpose, then they may think, okay, I can control my impulses, I can work hard at my job, I can excel. But what is the point of it? The point of it is so that I can party afterwards. So that, if that is the conception of life, then it's not that they can't control the impulses, they may not even feel the need to control it. So it can vary. When we talk about spiritual intelligence, here it's more in terms of the conception of life, the purpose of life that one has. So it's not necessary that there are going to be two departments clearly within the intelligence. See, this is, as I'm focusing on, there is the operational aspect, and there is what is in philosophy called as the ontological aspect. Ontology is the nature of reality. So we are not going too much into the ontology over here, because once you go into ontology, things become quite technical. Just to go back to software, say if we consider in our phone, there is the basic operating system. Then there are some pre-installed apps which come with the phone, and then there are some apps which we install. Now from the perspective, or from one perspective, you can say, okay, this is the fundamental operating system, these are pre-installed apps, these are the user installed apps. But from the perspective of coding, it's all just code only, isn't it? So we could say that from a functional perspective, there is a difference. From a structural perspective, well, you could go into technicalities and say the code that is for operating system is slightly different from the code for these apps, but that becomes quite technical. So in general, the Bhagavad-gita doesn't go too much into ontology. It gives the broad contours of ontology. This is matter, this is spirit, then this is subtle matter, this is gross matter. Even the idea of the mind and intelligence, the Bhagavad-gita doesn't go too much into detail in differentiating it. So the material intelligence or spiritual intelligence, it doesn't really make that much difference. Arjuna had the capacity to perform austerities. That's how he did various austerities by which he could get various celestial weapons. At the same time, at this particular point when he had to fight a war, his intelligence didn't work properly. So that's why he needed some guidance. Okay. Any other reflections, questions? Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for the talk until here. This is my first spiritual talk in US, so I'm really enjoying it. So I have a question. Like I am having a little bit problem with reconciliation of things that you are discussing. So the thing, in Gita chapter 2, it's mentioned that Lord Krishna is the source of all yash. Everything that is good is coming from him. So my question to you is on, I think that I believe the 10th or the 11th day of the Mahabharata, Lord Krishna got a little bit angry and he took the wheel of the Rath and he asked Bhishma to either surrender or to be killed by him. So do you think that otherwise self took over him, or it's the wise self? Like how do you differentiate his action, because it seems impulsive, because then Arjuna ran to him to the, like he was fallen on his feet and said, "Oh, no, I will war, I would fight the war, you don't have to take arms." So do you think it's the otherwise self that took over him, or it's the wise
Good
self?
question.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a nice question. So on the ninth day, specifically of the Kurukshetra war, when Bhishma was fighting wholeheartedly and Arjuna was fighting half-heartedly, so it seemed as if Bhishma would kill Arjuna, and at that time Krishna intervened, and Krishna took up a chariot wheel that had been from a disabled chariot nearby, picked it up and raced toward Bhishma to stop. And Arjuna ran after him, caught his thigh and dragged him to a stop and begged him. He says, "I will fight wholeheartedly. Please don't break your vow." Because Krishna had given his word that he would not raise any weapons during the battle. So Krishna had got angry. So was this the otherwise self-acting? Not necessarily. That's why when I started by talking earlier about the mind and the senses, they don't, everything that they say is not always bad. It's like if we consider anger. See, generally we may consider anger to be undesirable. But it's not always that anger is undesirable. Sometimes the absence of anger may be undesirable. When something terrible happens right in front of us, and if there's no reaction, maybe there is some child abuser who is ruthlessly beating some small child, and if somebody doesn't feel anything, let it go on. If there is something missing essential in you, how did you feel anything about this? Of course, we may not want to immediately go and beat that person, or we may not want to act on that anger. So often this kind of anger is differentiated with using the word outrage. That when we see some indignity, some atrocity happening, so outrage may not only be desirable but be essential. Now, of course, how somebody acts in that outrage is a different thing. So sometimes anger gets a negative press. So anger is simply a messenger. The problem is when the messenger becomes the ruler. See, anger indicates that something is seriously wrong. So suppose there is a king who has his kingdom, and there is the boundary where maybe some invader has come. And then the king has some messengers over there, come running and they tell that, "Oh, this neighboring king has attacked over here, this has plundered this part over there." So that is the messenger. So when the messenger comes, now what is the king to do? Does the king mean immediately, "I'm going to go and attack that and fight that king and defeat that king"? Well, maybe that's one course of action. Another course would be to find out that we had friendly relationships. Why is this person doing like this? Maybe the opposing forces are acting without the knowledge of that king also. Maybe there is some rebellious element over there. So find out more about this. So anger is a messenger, and we don't want that messenger to be muted, leave alone eliminated. But what we also don't want is that messenger to become the ruler. Because so somebody is supposed to be a messenger. That okay, this particular incursion has happened over here. Well, that person may not be the best person to decide the strategy for responding to it. So anger itself is not a bad thing always. That's the first point. And second point is, in that particular context, so Krishna was protecting dharma. His purpose was to establish dharma in the world, and Arjuna was his nimitta. Arjuna was his instrument. There was this friend, and they were acting cooperatively. So when Krishna felt that Arjuna was threatened, at that time Krishna decided to take action in his own hands. So take things in his own hands. So that was actually an expression of his love. Suppose somebody gets angry. Suppose say some mother has a baby and a small child, and somebody is threatening that child, and the mother gets angry. How dare you threaten my child like this? But that anger is an expression of love. Now, of course, as I said, whether that how that anger needs to be expressed can be according to time, place, circumstance. Now, in this case, so the point is, emotions don't always express the lower self. Emotions can also be an expression of the higher self at times. Because sometimes if we just go along with a normal behavior, then what we feel strongly about, what we value, that may not be manifest. And sometimes it's important to know what do you really care for. So in that particular case, it was Krishna's Bhakta Vatsalya. It was his love for his devotees, because of which he put aside his vow at that time. So that's not expression of the lower self. It is an expression of the higher self itself. So emotions don't always come from the lower. They can. That's why introspection is required to know which emotion is coming from where. Okay, thank you. So let's look at these three parts. We discussed till now about how we want to see how the Gita can help us understand and transform ourselves. And in that connection, we discussed the Gita's model of the self, that there is the higher self and the lower self, or the wise self and the otherwise self. So now the inner illuminator is what we discussed till now, broadly speaking. That through introspection, we can start sensing which self is acting. So is it the higher self or the lower self? Now introspection, if we want to do it, there's a lot that we can introspect about. I sometimes conduct seminars on journaling, how to journal in a way that is systematic, that is effective. At the same time, it uses self-expression. So one problem is that if somebody starts journaling, it can become very self-indulgent. Oh, I did this in the morning and I felt like this, and then this happened and that happened. You can spend hours and hours on it also. So the point is, for introspection to be effective, it needs to be purposeful. So for example, if there is a particular issue we want to deal with, say I've decided that I need to manage my anger. One of the biggest problems with managing anger is that most people feel there is no anger to manage. So if somebody tells me, you are getting angry, I'm not getting angry. So when they remind you that you're getting angry, that agitates the person. So what needs to be done is, okay, how can I sense that I'm getting angry? Maybe at the end of the day, I just look back at the day, see what were that incidents when maybe I raised my voice, or maybe even if I didn't raise my voice, just I change my tone. See, quite often what happens is, if we are arguing with someone, we can't avoid arguments because we are all different individuals and there will be differences of opinion. Now we could either, when there is an argument, we could raise our voice or we could refine our argument. But sometimes what happens is the impulse, the lower self, it just wants to raise, how dare you not listen to me? We raise our voice. So we can look back and see, okay, hey, that time, maybe that's not the best way I could have behaved. So if we look back, introspection in a focused way, is there one particular area I want to improve in my life? And with that, look back at the day. And if we start doing this, gradually what will happen is that sensor will become stronger within us. And maybe sometimes we get angry, and when somebody says, if somebody says you're getting angry, I'm not getting angry. It's not that for somebody who's observing, you can feel that this is stupid, you're actually yelling. But that person doesn't even sense it at that time. But gradually, as our senses starts improving, then even before we get angry, we'll start realizing, okay, right now I'm getting angry. Maybe let me just walk away from it. Let me change the subject right now. We can deal with this afterwards. So the solution part we can come to later. But introspection, it's how will it help us? This model that, okay, now my impulsive self is acting out. I don't need to let it take control, but I may not be able to control it. So let me just walk away from here, or let me avoid this situation. We all have certain situations or certain people that seem to bring out the worst within us. So if that happens, just be a little more cautious. Maybe avoid those situations, or be more careful, be better prepared when going in for those interactions. So this is we all can do introspection, but if we have this model, okay, this is the lower self acting, then we can try to catch, hey, this is the lower self acting, this is the mind speaking. And then, okay, I don't have to say yes to this right now. So that is the inner illuminator part. Then there is the inner cleanser part. So what happens is that for all of us, when we act, let me first tell what is there over here and I'll explain it. That there are certain features in our inner world that we can't change very easily. It's going back to the software metaphor. If I don't want this app, I can just delete this app. But sometimes we try to delete, and you don't have the permission to delete this app. It's my phone. Why don't I have the permission? So what happens is, for us also, in our inner world, there are certain things which say, I don't want to do it. But it seems as if that thing exists inside us, independent of us. It's a part of me. I should be in charge. How can I not control it? But if you go back to the software, so there are certain software, say for example, are vital for the functioning of the phone. And they may be in an area where we are not given access to. So some phones, if you want to modify certain things, you have to root the phone to get some special apps to get access over there. So within our inner world also, there are certain aspects which we can't change very easily. So one aspect of that is the instincts. So say if I touch my hand over here, and say if there's some live current going through this, I touch this, immediately my hand goes. Now at that time, it is not that I'm consciously thinking, hey, maybe there's electricity, the electricity will give me a shock, maybe I'll get burnt, maybe I'll get injured, maybe I'll die, I don't want to touch this. No, it's just that my hand goes over there, I feel something, immediately my hand moves. So we all have these instincts, and these instincts are required for our protection, for our survival, for our functioning. So these are all a part of our inner world, a subtle world, which is not in our control. So if we try to delete them, we can't. So this is an experiment that many biologists have tried out, and if we just suddenly bring our fingers close to our eyes, immediately our eyes will blink and we'll close our eyes. No matter how much you try, you may know for yourself, I'm not going to pierce my eyes. Just bring it closer, the eye will blink. So that's just a reflex instinct. We can't change that much. It's not so you have to try it out. Sure. But so there are certain things like that which we can't change, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But what happens is, this particular area of the memory, which is not in our control, what goes inside that is also not in our control. That is where habits also come in. We start doing something repeatedly, our mind that starts figuring out, maybe this is important. That goes in that part of our inner world, which is no longer in our control. So generally, when we use the word habit, habit itself in psychology is a big subject. What exactly is a habit? But basically, we can say a habit is something which we do almost automatically without needing conscious attention. For example, if we are going to learn driving, first time when we are learning driving, where all do I pay attention to? I have to move the wheels, and I have to have my feet on the brake, and there is the gas, and then there is the rear view mirror, and then the side view mirror, and sometimes we feel there's a cognitive overload. How do I function with all this? But once we get used to it, what happens is we are aware of what is necessary, but then we can have a conversation with the others in the family, who are in the car with us, or maybe we can hear some audio book, we can listen to some music, we can make some phone calls, not with the hands, but off the hands, we can do multiple things. So once it becomes a habit, so habits also, in one sense, they serve our purpose. The things that don't require our conscious attention, we can do them without needing too much conscious attention. So if we're doing our dishes, we can talk on phone. We are doing our laundry, we can do some other things at that time. So that's good for us. But what happens is there are habits which are healthy and there are habits that are unhealthy. So once something goes into that part of the brain, that part of our inner world where it's no longer in our control, that is meant for our protection, but sometimes it may not be for our protection. So sometimes you say, I decided to change this, but I just can't change it. Why is that happening? It's not just that we lack willpower. Willpower is a part of the issue, but it's not just willpower. If that behavior has gone into what is sometimes psychology called a subconscious mind, or in the yoga terminology, in the Bhagavad-gita terminology, it's called samskaras. What has become deep-rooted impressions inside us, then it's almost as if they act on their own. And even when we want to change them, we don't have access to that part of the memory. And that's why habits are so difficult to change, because they have become a part of our programming. Not just a part of our programming, a part of the programming that we can't change. Now we may say this may make sense, but it also causes alarm. Can I not change it at all? Well, it doesn't mean we can't change it, but the change is not something which will happen only by our conscious intention. So that part of the programming which we say, okay, you don't have permission to delete this, like that can be accessed, modified, not through the force of our intention, but that can be accessed only through the frequency of repetition. So that part, if something is, say, as soon as I wake up, the first thing that I do is maybe I look at the news every day. Maybe that's not the best thing to do when I wake up, but that's become my habit. But then if I want to change that, the way is not, I won't do it. No, do something else. Maybe read some wisdom quote, maybe read some Bhagavad-gita, just 5 minutes you can read that. So once we start doing that, the force of repetition, as we keep doing it more and more, then this new impression will go into that subconscious memory. That will become a samskar. And that's how the unwarranted behavior can be changed. Unwanted behavior placed. And this is where rituals, the word ritual often has a very negative connotation. You're just being ritualistic. But rituals are basically behaviors that are repeated so that they trigger certain dispositions, certain moods. So if you consider top sports players, they all have their particular rituals. They may have that, say if there's a cricket player, they have to tie their pads. They'll tie the right pad first, they'll tie the lower strap first and then the upper strap. So certain cricketers, when they come in, if they are going across the boundary line, they'll put the right step first, not the left step first. Sometimes they put the left step by myself, they'll go back and they put the right step forward and they'll come inside. Now why is that? Because it's not just superstitious, it's not just sentimental. It is that certain external actions, when they're done repeatedly, then they start stimulating certain corresponding inner emotions. So to have certain rituals the word ritual may have a negative connotation, but ritual basically means a habitual set of actions which we do regularly. That is one of the soundest ways to change our inner disposition. And so in religion, when there are many what we call as rituals, which are often seen pejoratively, negatively, they had a purpose. So when we go in front of the altar and we bow down, we pray to the Lord, we fold our hands. That might just say, oh, this is just a ritual that I do from my upbringing or from my parents or whatever. Well, maybe it is, that's our conception. But the purpose of that is to remind us that there is a higher reality, that there is a higher organizing principle beyond us. And we need to work cooperatively with that principle. We need to have a harmonious relationship with that higher reality. So the rituals are, in one sense, very powerful tools to reprogram ourselves, to change our habits for a healthier habit. So in our tradition, we chant the Hare Krishna mantra. So the Hare Krishna mantra, we're just repeating it again and again. It might seem like a ritual. Well, yes, it is a ritual, but it is a transformative ritual. Because as we keep doing it, we access a higher power. And as we start accessing that higher power, that turning to an higher power becomes a default instinct. When we face perplexity, when we face adversity, rather than getting overwhelmed, the reflex instinct becomes that, okay, let me turn to higher power. Let me remind myself that there is a higher reality. And then with that connection with the higher reality, let me face my situations. So rather than simply worrying about how big the problem is and getting overwhelmed, we can remind ourselves that God is bigger than, no matter how big the problem may be, God is still bigger. And He can give me the strength to deal with problems. So this is the idea of the inner cleanser. So there are habits which we already have deemed necessary. And some of them may be good, some of them may not be good. Now we want to transform ourselves. What we need to do is develop healthier habits. And any healthy habit can transform us, can benefit us. But bhakti as a healthy habit will transform us the most efficaciously. Because with a higher reality. So whether it is praying, whether it is chanting the holy names, whether it is reading a sacred book like the Bhagavad-gita daily, that all these can help us change the power dynamics in our inner world. And slowly but surely, what is beyond our capacity to change, you don't have the permission to delete that. We'll find we'll be able to modify that also. And that is where the inner training comes in. So the inner cleansing is about recognizing some things cannot be changed automatically, changed just by willpower. They need to be changed by repetition. And the inner training is actually developing those particular behaviors which will be conducive for our positive transformation. So we can start with something very simple. Say, for example, if there's a particular situation when I tend to get angry. So when I tend to get angry, instead of giving into the anger, I'll just take a few deep breaths. Maybe I'll chant Krishna's names in my mind. If I can chant loudly, that's good. If I can't, I'll just chant in my mind. Then that will become a positive reflex for us. That will become a healthy reflex for us. So although in that situation, our lower self will tend to act, but we can replace that with the higher self acting. And that's how we can become positively transformed. And the Bhagavad-gita says that actually each one of us is a part of the divine. Mamai vamsho jiva loke. And how much potential the divine has kept within each one of our souls. None of us knows that. We all, if we look back at our lives, we all have achieved something. We have all done something worthwhile in our lives. And yet, if we look at ourselves, we can see there are so many times when we acted against ourselves. So despite our sometimes being distracted, half-hearted, sometimes our sabotaging ourselves, despite that, we have achieved some things in our life. Now, if we could start tapping our full potential, if we stop sabotaging ourselves or distracting ourselves, how much more good we could do in the world. Discovering that can be the adventure of our life. In fact, that can be the greatest adventure of our life. So the Bhagavad-gita invites all of us to become like Arjuna and unleash our full potential, by which we can become agents for good in our family, in our community, and if not in the whole world, in our corner of the world. And in that way, we all can not only transform ourselves for the better, but transform our world for the better. So I'll summarize. We discussed 4 main points in today's talk. First, I started with this, the wise and the otherwise, this dynamic, that what is going on inside us. So to get a sense of that, the Bhagavad Gita's model of multiple levels. The mind and the senses, which is like the lower self, the otherwise self, and the intelligence and the soul, that is the higher self or the wise self. So that model, we got a working understanding of that. And then as a metaphor for understanding that model, I discussed about software. So the whole subtle reality is like the software, the physical reality is the hardware, and the soul is the user. And so the two ideas of thoughts. So some thoughts just pop up, and some thoughts come by conscious reflection. So if we want to transform ourselves, we want to act according, we want the higher self to be acting, not the lower self, or at least not the lower self without our awareness that it is acting. And in that connection, we talked about the Gita can be like the inner illuminator. Through introspection, we can understand that, oh, okay, this is the self acting, and maybe I want this to act, maybe I don't want this to act. And then after the inner illuminator, we talk about the inner cleanser, that just intention is not enough to change certain behaviors, because our inner world is designed in such a way that some part of the inner world is inaccessible to us casually. So instincts and habits, they are inaccessible through intention alone, but they can be accessed through repetition. And that's why to bring about that change, that inner cleansing, we need the inner trainer. Then we need to create rituals that we do repeatedly. Healthy rituals can replace our unhealthy rituals or unhealthy habits, and that's how we can change our inner world. And if we do that, all of us have a lot of potential latent within us. We can tap that potential and we can become agents for good in this world, and we can in this way transform ourselves. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Are there any 1 or 2 questions? We have time for questions? Okay. Yes, please.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you for the talk. I had a question. So the analogy of hardware being the body, software being the mind, and the user being the soul, what does the soul use the body and mind for? Because in the user uses hardware and software for some purpose. What is that purpose for the soul?
Yeah, in the 15th chapter of the Gita. So what purpose does the soul use the body, mind, hardware, software for? So Krishna says that Shariram yadavapnoti yachapyutkramiti ishvara gruhitvaitani sanyanti vayur gandhani vashayat. Says that the soul goes through different hardwares and softwares. There is the concept of reincarnation. This is the present embodiment. We have had previous embodiments. We will have future embodiments also. When we get a particular embodiment, when we get a particular body mind machine, we also come with certain conceptions of life, which we have acquired from our previous actions, previous lives. So each of us may have different conceptions, not entirely different, but significantly different. So our conceptions are shaped by our previous life, and they're also shaped by our upbringing, our association in this life. And it can evolve gradually. Now, depending on in the soul in non-human bodies, it functions primarily for, could say, survival and reproduction. Those are the primary drives. We humans also need to survive and reproduce, but we think of something more. We want meaning and purpose for our existence. And that search for meaning and purpose is what Vedanta Sutra calls as Brahma Jigyasa. What is life meant for? What is the nature of reality? What is the ultimate reality? What is the purpose of my existence? So those questions, there is the potential for us to ask those questions. But we may not always ask those questions because the world may inundate us with so many other questions. So that's why in the Mahabharata there's two terms. There is Nishreyas and there is Abhyuday. Abhyuday or prayas, what it means is immediate pleasure. So most of us get caught in that. And then when that happens, then the soul uses the mind and the body just to pursue immediate pleasures more and more. But if we are fortunate, either some contemplation arises, contemplativeness arises from inside us, or sometimes we associate with others who trigger that contemplativeness within us. And then that nishreyas, that urge for thinking about the long-term thing, thinking about the big picture of life, the big purpose of life, that starts getting awakened. So that is up to the individual, what the mind-body machine will be used for. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
So, Prabhu, you are mentioning that when we repeatedly do something, those impressions will replace or they will go into our inner world and help us overcome the other habits which are detrimental for us. How important are those rituals for them to have a taste for us? Sorry, let me rephrase that. So if I'm doing certain ritual, wake up in the morning instead of looking at the news, which I like to do, let's say I read a wisdom quote, but that's not giving me a taste. So can mechanical repetition of certain rituals become the habit, or does it need to have a component of taste? Hare Krishna.
Good question. Thank you. So will mechanical repetition itself lead to taste gradually? That's why there is individual self-assessment that is important. That within the mechanical rituals, there will be certain which will be easier for us to develop taste for. So if you consider a Venn diagram, there are certain things which we like to do and certain things which are good for us. If these two are identical, life would be so simple. Now, the problem is that there is a large amount of dissimilarity between these two circles, but there is some overlap. Some things which we like to do and some things which are good for us. Say now we say, okay, wisdom quote, I know it's good, but I don't like it. Okay, maybe there's something which we like also. Maybe there's some music which we like. Now we may like any kind of music, but within music there are different kinds. Maybe there is there's uplifting bhakti kind of music. So if we like music and music is one circle we like, and if we say bhakti spirituality is something good for us, so we can find bhakti music as the intersection between the two. So then the taste will come easier. In some habits which are healthy for us, the taste may take a very long time to come. But if we want transformation to be faster, it's better to start to keep the fulcrum of that self-transformation, something which is in the intersection of the two. In Sanskrit, this is called as Uddipan. Uddipan is a spiritual stimulus. So we all have certain sensory stimuli that we may be attracted to. We may like particular decades, say Bollywood music, or we may like a particular kind of food. We may like a particular kind of literature or particular kind of reading material. So that's individual. So just as there is our individuality in our likes in the material domain, there can be individuality in our likes in the spiritual domain also. So we find something which is at the intersection that will make the transformation easier. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I go ahead, or you want to go with the online?
Rambabu Prabhu, you can ask your question.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dhanavad Pranam. Prabhuji, generally we have this prayer of acting as an instrument for serving God. for different services. So for a sincere devotee, so whose settled body is not yet completely purified, so what's the mechanism of acting as an instrument? Or in other words, how one should prepare oneself for doing service, for acting as an instrument of mercy?
Okay. So if we are not yet purified, then how can we prepare to act as an instrument? Generally speaking, we are always acting and we can't avoid that. So just the absence of purity is not going to lead to an absence of action. We have to act. So now broadly we can say that there are certain things which we all know are good, and there are certain things which we know are harmful. You could say instead of good has a moral connotation over here. Let's say helpful, which are constructive, or helpful, and certain things which are destructive or harmful. So we all can, if we just sit down for a few minutes, we can list say 3 things which if I did them better, and they're not impossible for me to do. If I do them better, I can actually improve my life. And there are 3 things if I don't stop, that's going to worsen my life. Now, apart from this constructive and destructive things, there could be things which are in the ambiguous domain. Okay, is this good? Is this bad? Should I be doing this? I don't know this. So what happens is, in general, education has to begin with black and white. Reality has shades of gray. But when we are trying to teach a small child, we don't start with, oh, this is a shade of gray. No, this is black, this is white. So similarly, with respect to our inner illumination also, we have to begin with black and white. This is what I know is good. Let me focus on doing this. This is what I know is harmful. I'll try to avoid it. And once we start doing that, then as our color instincts start becoming stronger, then we'll start, okay, when the shades of gray also, this is more on the blacker side. This is more on the whiter side. More and more clarity will come. So we don't have to wait for absolute purity to act as an instrument for doing something good in the world. What we know is good, constructive, we start with that, and gradually that scope will increase for us. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj, for a wonderful lecture. So I had more of a query about instinct. You gave an example where a mother is able to get angry when the child is in trouble. And I wanted to understand how instincts play a part over not just anger, but in general, all the 3. So anger, lust, and greed. Because in general, an animal may also become very angry when they see that their children are being attacked by another animal. And then the next thing I want to know is how does it relate to the general recommendation for any sadhana, where it is recommended that you get above your instincts, or above so basically above these 3 pulling down stuff. Yeah.
Good question. So how do instincts relate with, say, kama, krodha, lobha, anger, lust, and greed? Now there are different terms, and they relate with different things in our inner world. Roughly in Sanskrit, see, Sanskrit is a different language, and it comes from a different worldview. So it's not exactly correlated, but let me try to give a broad correlation. Within our inner world, there are 2 things which are a part of a programming that bypasses our intelligence. One is instinct, and I was talking more of instinct into the biological instinct. Like I said, touch my hand, I find there's something electricity over here, my hand moves away. Like somebody tries to pierce my eyes will close. So these are biological instincts. So we could say it's programmed intelligence. Now, animals sometimes exhibit amazing instincts. If you may have heard about bird migration, that birds can go thousands of miles and they don't have any kind of map or compass, at least to our capacity of analysis, and yet they just go to the right destination and come back. If a bird is captured, it's placed in a dark container and taken 100 miles away, and then it's released. It will just go up. It will go around for a few times, and then straight will start going back to its where its nest is. So these are instincts. These are programmed intelligence. So that is one thing. In Sanskrit, this is sometimes called as vritti. Swabhava, vritti. This is healthy. Now, what you mentioned about lust, anger, greed, the more precise word for that is not instincts, that is impulses. So instincts and impulses both bypass our intelligence. But instincts, they bypass our conscious intelligence to act according to us, you could say, a subconscious intelligence. So instincts are intelligent, but they are intelligence without conscious thought. Whereas generally impulses are anti-intelligent. Or if not anti-intelligent, they're at least unintelligent. They just don't care about the intelligence. Sometimes they work against the intelligence. So lust, anger, greed, they are not considered instincts as much as impulses. So in Sanskrit, instincts is vritti, and impulses are more like vasanas. So they need to be curbed. In the Bhagavad-gita 3rd chapter, Krishna says that we all have certain kinds of instincts. You probably know about the system of varnashram, where there's Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. This has degenerated into the caste system now, and that caste was thought to be determined by birth, which became very discriminatory. But the original was that it's not so much like a caste system as it is a system of human types. There are certain people who are by nature intellectual. There are certain people who are by nature managerial. That's Brahman and Kshatriya. So those are innate instincts that somebody has. So somebody just like there are some traditional rituals where a newborn child is told, where does the child go and pick up a book? The child go and pick up some weapons. Does the child pick up some currency, or that is said to indicate the instincts. Now, how accurate that ritual is open to question. But the point is that is indicative. So Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita says that these kind of instincts, you cannot suppress them. Swabhavajena kaunteya nibaddhasvena karmana kartum nechasi anmohat karishyasya vashopitat. So he says everybody will act according to nigraha kim karishyasi. What will repression accomplish? So Krishna is telling Arjuna, you are a Kshatriya, you cannot act like a Brahmana. You should act according to you. So instincts are considered good in the sense that they are innate intelligence that we have got. So better understand it and tap it. But this is in 3rd chapter, is 34, 35 verses, 33, 34 verses. And then just a few verses later, Krishna tells that as when he talks about the impulses, he says we have to restrain it. Tasmatam niyandrin indriyanyadav niyamya bharatarshabha. He says in 3-4 to restrain. Talking about the vasanas. Those are two different things. So lust, anger, greed, they need to be restrained. Whereas the instincts, like the particular innate intelligence that we have, that is, and you start playing, they become, what to speak of 2 or 3, they get wrong. So if we have instincts, that's a fortune. It's a blessing and we need to tap it. But impulses, we all need to restrain. Okay? Thank you. So, okay, last question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Prabhu, so my question is around, how do you know what are the antidotes of bad habits, right? Like the example you were giving, you're getting angry, antidote is to get out of the situation, change the topic and move out of it. There are like other bad habits that someone might have, let's say, should I respond to this text or something like that, right? And at that time it's easy, like keep the phone away and like forget about it. But sometimes when you're in situation like the example you were giving, that someone is angry and he doesn't even know that he's angry, and like he's shouting like, I'm not angry, the example. So my question is, how do you know that, what is the antidote for that? Like if anger is is the problem, then you move out of the situation. That's one.
Yeah, the antidote that will work for us. So that is where
and how do we differentiate between like that impulse and um, impulse, and the second one is like the instinct, sorry. So yeah, how do I instinct are there, right? Anger is also an instinct, like you said. So
okay, anger is the impulse, but I
impulse,
understand where you're
sorry,
coming
yes.
from. So see, okay, let's not get too hung up with terms here. You could say there is something from within us which pops up which is constructive, and something which is not so constructive. So whatever is not constructive, whatever is destructive, we can't stop it very easily because it will just come up. What we can do is we can try to get something else to pop up which is more constructive. So imagine you're in a room with someone you don't like at all, but somehow maybe it's a lift, it's an elevator, and you're locked. For 15 minutes you're there. Now what can you do? You just can't just look at the roof all the time. You may say, I don't want to like to talk with this person, but what can we do if that's the only person there? So generally speaking, to say no to something is not very easy. But if we have something else to say yes to, say if in that elevator where we are trapped, there's not just that one person, there's another person. So what we may start talking with the second person, and then neglecting the first person will become easier for us. So we can't get rid of the first person, but the second person makes dealing with the first person easier. So similarly for us, that first impulse that comes up, we can't change that. Do we have some water or something? But if we can train ourselves to develop a second impulse or a second response to it, then that can help us combat the first. So what would that mean? That could just mean that, as I said, take a few, or just look back at our lives and see what has call up a friend and talk with them, call up some friend, family member. So what will work for them? So what will work for us, that will vary from person to person. We need to find that out, and some introspection helps in that, not just to see where I'm going wrong, but where I can go right, or which right responses will work for me. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Srimad Bhagavad-gita ki jai. Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. So as was mentioned in the introduction, I have written a few books. These are two of my latest books. So much of what I spoke today is based, you'll find in this book called this book, Bhagavad-gita Insights. So these two approach the Gita. Both of them have 100 articles in it. They're on different 100 verses from the Gita. So this approaches the Gita more from a relational perspective. Right? How does the Gita reflect the loving relationship between Krishna and Arjuna, and how their relationship develops through the discussion of the Gita? So there are quite a few stories from the Mahabharata which are correlated with the Gita's wisdom in this book. And this is Bhagavad-gita Insight. So 342, the verse which I discussed, many of the concepts associated with that are there in this book. So this is more from a rational perspective. When somebody reads the Gita, when Krishna uses the word karma, what does he mean? So do we really have free will? And Krishna says there is Maya, then is everything an illusion? Or if everything, not everything, is something an illusion? What is exactly the nature of illusion? So when Krishna says, be detached, how can we be detached without becoming hard-hearted or irresponsible or uncaring? So those kind of concepts which we may have questions about through a cursory reading of the Gita, answers to those are given in this book. So these two books are available also as a set at a discount. And then this is the 365 quotes inspired by the Bhagavad Gita. They are on topics like the art of balance, empower yourself, mindfulness, and so each page has one quote. You can just keep this on your desk in your home or office, and you can change one quote, contemplate on it. If you Google the quote, you will go to my website gitadaily.com, where you'll find an article explaining this quote as well as connecting it with the specific Gita verse. So this is an easy way to have some spiritual reflection in your daily schedule and your daily horizon. And these two books, each of these is just a one, generally 2-page article, so you can read in about 5 minutes. There are about 80 illustrations along with the 100 articles. Thank you. So that will also make it easier to understand the concepts. So these and other books are available on the table nearby. You can have a look at them if you want. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu, for enlightening us with the knowledge of Bhagavad-gita. We'd also like to thank Mukaravind Prabhu and Ananga Gopika Mataji for kindly opening their homes and hosting this program. So big Haribol to Mukaravind Prabhu, Ananga Gopika Mataji and Ramani. So please have a look at the books. The book table is over there, and also have prasadam. The prasadam is being served in the garage. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. So just for logistics, we can get out from here, and the prasadam is in garage. You can take anywhere in the home. There are 2 rooms also open. In case it gets filled, you can take in prasadam in any of the 2 rooms, and there are restrooms inside. Or if you want, you can come here outside also and take. It's little getting chill. So